The so-called Beat Generation was a whole bunch of people of all different nationalities who came to the conclusion that society sucked. This was said by Amiri Baraka, and I can't argue with him. This is a very simple way of interpreting the Beat Generation's true influence and message. The message of the Beats is not a single one, but rather a similar message broadcast through many different means by many different writers. They were artists, influenced by and influencing other artists. I am certainly a lover of books and poems, art that is in the form of words on a page. The Beats were perhaps the highest functioning practitioners of this art, and I hope to be able to share with you their history and provide you a hook to explore the specific works of these individuals. When Jack Kerouac in 1948 used the words Beat Generation to describe his circle of friends in New York City, he could not possibly have foreseen that 60 years later these friends of him would be discussed as possibly the most influential writers in recent American history. The Beat Generation was a literary movement beginning in the late 1940s and emerging culturally in the 1950s that included multiple writers all seeking to avoid censorship and reject the so-called normal values of Americans and American writing. I'm going to discuss the lives of two of the most influential of the Beat Generation writers, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, what influenced each of them individually, and what drove them to write such inspired texts. They were wildly different men, but both very fantastic writers. I hope you'll see them this way too. I'll start with Jack Kerouac. He was born March 12, 1922 in Lowell, Massachusetts. He was a star player on his high school football team, which earned him a scholarship to Columbia University in New York. There he met Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, and Neal Cassady. As with most writers, there was a lot of struggle before he had any success. From 1950 to 57, Kerouac spent much of his time wandering around America, writing many novels but only publishing one. His style of writing became a free-form, spontaneous process without a lot of self-editing or fictionalizing. This is the most lasting effect of Jack Kerouac and the Beat movement. In 1957, after his friends, specifically Allen Ginsberg, had achieved some level of fame, publishers began to pay attention to Jack. His classic On the Road was finally published in this year. However, the fame that came from it wasn't what he wanted. For whatever reason, it was decided that he was the spokesperson of the Beats, at least in the media's eyes. He was harshly received by the critics, and what had been a habit of drinking became a significant problem. He wrote his last novel in 1961 about an attempt to reconcile within himself the personal conflicts that made him so prone to alcoholism, binge drinking, and otherwise destructive behavior. He was unable to resolve these issues, but the writing is still haunting to read. After this failure, he moved back into his mother's house, despite being a full-grown man, and continued to live with her, disconnected from his friends and the rest of the world, until he died from heavy drinking at the age of 47. The next writer I want to highlight is a better example of someone who embraced the Beat movement and transcended it to become a great social activist. This person is Allen Ginsberg. Allen was born June 3, 1926 in New Jersey. His mother was a paranoid schizophrenic and a member of the Communist Party. She is the subject of much of his work. After high school, Ginsberg was given an academic scholarship to Columbia University in New York, where he met his friends Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, and Neal Cassady. Ginsberg wrote poetry, but was tired of rhyming, tightly regimented poetry of the past. He, too, was influenced by Kerouac's free-form, spontaneous style, and in 1955 wrote his most famous work, Howl for Carl Solomon. He recited it for the first time in October 1955 in San Francisco and received high praise. However, when it was published, local San Francisco police seized the book, and Ginsberg and the publishers were charged with selling an obscene and indecent book. This trial received a lot of media coverage and really helped to boost the Beat movement's reputation in the United States. The charges were eventually dropped. Ginsberg spent much of his time after the trial exploring the world, from Paris to Tangier, from 1956 to 58. In 1958, he returned to New York to try and cope with the death of his mother, who had died 2 years previously after decades in mental health facilities. His coping produced a truly heartfelt, disturbing, yet artistically appealing beyond compare poem called Kaddish for Naomi Ginsberg. After Allen Ginsberg was not content with just being a writer, or simply writing about the problems in the world and doing nothing to try to fix them. During the 1960s, he became a figurehead for the hippie movement. He continued to write magnificent poems and remained a radical figure in society, seeking to promote enlightenment and the idea that every person should be themselves. He lived and spread his message for a long time. He died in 1997 at the age of 71. The Beat Generation will continue to stand as the most influential group of American writers to date, at least in my mind. Their experience in life was so varied, and the work they produced so incredibly disturbing, yet insightful at the same time. To get in the head of such conflicted people, living in such crazy times, is a true gift that I, for one, am glad to have been given. The Beats each had their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own goals and motivations. The two writers I have profiled are certainly different people, with radically different lives and problems, yet they were connected by friendship and a desire to attain enlightenment. I hope that throughout my descriptions of these writers' lives you have ascertained the common thread running between them. The Beat generation was about freedom. Freedom in the way you could write, and freedom in the things you could do. Freedom in the subject matter of your poem or your story. The censors that attempted to stop the Beats from attaining this freedom were unsuccessful, and I'm so grateful for that. Free speech has always been a part of our nation's history, but I think that the Beats took it to a new level and showed us all what freedom really meant. I hope you will go to a library or a bookstore or a poetry website and experience some of these great works for yourself, if you haven't already. The Beat generation's influence is always there. You just have to look for it.